Did you get a bowl or burrito?
I got a burrito, half steak, half chicken. I couldn't move for about 45 minutes, yeah.
It's a good way to segue into an O-line video. All right, we'll start at 20.
Cold open, Matthew. Keep it in there.
Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. Going to take a look at the Texas offensive line today, both the team overview heading into 2025 and what the 2026 recruiting cycle looks like for Kyle Flood. This edition of On Texas Football is brought to you by Allegiant Digital Marketing. We'll tell you more about Allegiant Digital Marketing here later in the show. Right now, CJ, let's look at the team, just an overview of the offensive line. And I figured this would be a good time to look at the offensive line for a couple of reasons. One, when you look at our countdown days, we're in the 70s, and Sunday is 76 days. And between Kent Perkins and Derek Dockery and Jackson Christian on the current roster, a lot of offensive linemen tend to wear 76. And on the Friday live stream with you, myself, and Rod Babers, we looked at a Texas secondary that Pro Football Focus ranked as the #1 secondary in the country. So that rounds out PFF's position groups. And the only position group that wasn't ranked the top 10 group or even got an honorable mention was the offensive line. So, CJ, I'll ask you this to start out. When you look back at the offensive line in 2024, if you could put into one word how you describe the offensive line, what would it be?
That's a great question. Let me think of my adjectives real quick. You know, it's better than inconsistent. It's a little bit higher than frustrating, but those were kind of what came to mind. Patchy in a way. I know that kind of resembles that of injury, but you look at the great games Texas had. Clemson, Texas A&M, Oklahoma on the ground. Games in which your run game really dominated the opposing front seven. And you sit there wondering why it wasn't able to do that against the Georgia or an Arizona State, or you go on to Ohio State and you couldn't replicate that success. Is it because they had bigger, better, faster, stronger guys? Maybe. We talk about a Clemson supposed to have one of the best front sevens in all of college football in 2025. Texas A&M put several defensive linemen into the NFL this past spring. Oklahoma very much the same. So it's frustrating in the way that, yes, they did have success. Yes, you did have some great running games. Yes, there was a clean pocket for Quinn Ewers more times than there wasn't. But in the same sense, you know, there left some meat in the bone in the sense that you didn't average a lot of rushing yards. I believe it was under 40 rushing yards in all three of the losses from 2024. Now, there was times in which pass protection fell in an instance in which it didn't need to or shouldn't have. So I don't want to discredit it entirely, right? Because it was a Joe Moore Award finalist for the best offensive line unit in the country, but there felt like there should have been more for as elder a group as it was and as talented a group as it was, sending 3 guys into the NFL, plus Jake Majors, who ended up signing immediately after the draft.
I don't think you're off base saying inconsistent, CJ, and I'll tell you why. I'll just look at Pro Football Focus. And again, Pro Football Focus isn't the be-all, end-all, but it's better than what we used to have, which was nothing. PFF considers a grade of 60 to be average, so it's right on the line of average. These are the games where the Texas run blocking grade for the game grade was above average, and I'm going from the lowest, which is 64.7, up to the highest all year, which was 73.4. Florida, Vanderbilt, Clemson, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Colorado State, and ULM. CJ, I think we can agree Texas controlled the line of scrimmage handily in all of those games, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Here are the games where you were, and UTSA, you were right at 60, so you were average. So it's a nice line of demarcation. Here's the games where you were below average. Michigan, Georgia again, Arkansas, Texas A&M, Arizona State, Oklahoma, and the worst run blocking grade of the year came in the Cotton Bowl loss to Ohio State when you've got 4 chances to tie the game at point-blank range on 1st and goal at the 1. That's probably going to hinder your grade, especially the way that toss play played out. So going into 2025, CJ, it's an interesting year because Kelvin Banks is gone, Cameron Williams is gone, Jake Majors is gone. We've seen a lot of these guys that are a step up and be replacements. We got a really good sample of Trevor Goosby last year. We've seen a lot of DJ Campbell. We've seen a lot of Cole Hudson. As a matter of fact, in going back and rewatching some games from last year, namely the Cotton Bowl loss to Ohio State and the loss to Georgia in the SEC championship game, I didn't realize it at the time. Cole Hudson was on the field for a lot of high leverage snaps. So it's not like he just started 13 games as a true freshman and he's been like packed away in dry ice for the last 2 years. Like, he's actually been playing some football. So you've got some experience. It's just a group that doesn't have experience playing together. So is it Neto at left guard? Is it Cole Hudson's transition to center, CJ? Is it getting out of the tackle group, the tackle tandem of potentially Trevor Goosby and Brandon Baker, what you got out of Kelvin Banks and Cam Williams? What's used kind of that pressure point that's going to determine the ultimately success or failure for the O-line in 2025?
Well, you have to look at the more competitive games and use that as a buffer, right? And that's kind of what we use for 2024, right? Is those 2 Georgia matchups, is Ohio State. Ultimately, you couldn't move the ball via the ground. Ultimately, your offense was pretty stagnant for too long of parts of that game, and ultimately you lost those 3 games. For Texas, you're expecting now to be one of, if not the very best team in the country. If you play your top opposition and can't move the ball, that's an offensive line issue, right? That is a front issue. Last year, I think it was one of those, okay, it's a little inconsistent, but maybe it would have helped if you had a running quarterback. Maybe it would have helped if you had a true running back run one rather than kind of the hodgepodge group that Texas had to stitch together as the season progressed. This year, I don't think that there are those excuses. Yes, you have a new group, but you look at the individual strengths of this interior. DJ Campbell's a mauler up front. Cole Hudson was a guy that played in the triple option offense all the way up until high school. Now at the center position, a spot that he willingly moved over to, expecting him to be about 5-10 pounds heavier than a Jake Majors. And you look at Neto Umeozulu, who's always kind of played with that kind of chip on his shoulder, kind of a little feistiness where you kind of have to tempt him and say, hey, the whistle blew, man. Don't go too far, right? Yeah. You love that for your guards. That's expected to be the strength of this offensive line, is move bodies up in the interior, but that all comes with, hey, I got to see it before I believe it, right? Mm-hmm. We could sit here and talk about strengths on paper, what we think theoretically could happen, but until you see it, it kind of remains to be seen. The one thing I will say, this group has to be better reaching the second level in 2025. I look back to some of those teams that we just mentioned in the sense that Texas couldn't move the ball against Georgia, couldn't move the ball against Ohio State. Well, think about the guys that they had in their second levels, right? That's some of the best safeties that you'll see in all the country. Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom from Ohio State, Jalen Walker, we know how dangerous he is, Malachi Starks. These guys being able to come up and make plays without getting touched by the offensive line, that's got to improve as well. So maybe that's all it is. Texas really solid up front, but it's that second level where you see runs that go for 2 or 3 yards could extend into that 8, 9, 10 or a bust.
I'd like to think this group, as good as last year's group was, I'd like to think this group is going to be much better in short yardage and goal line situations because of those 3 guys on the interior. To me, that's what it all hinges on. I'm not really worried about Trevor Goosby because me personally, I'll speak for myself. I saw enough last year to feel as good as I can about losing the Outland Trophy winner and a first-round pick at left tackle and who's replacing him. So Goosby, to me, it's almost out of sight, out of mind. I trust he's going to be good there. Brandon Baker actually won a really competitive battle in the spring. Yes. We talked about it throughout the spring. Andre Kojo was coming along. Nick Brooks was coming along. But guess what? Brandon Baker entered spring ball as a starter. He left spring ball as a starter. Could that change between the time spring practice ended and the time they get to camp in July? Of course it could. But right now, I feel like Brandon Baker showed something by fending off some really good competition and hanging on to that starting right tackle job. To me, like you said, it's those 3 guys on the interior, Neto Umeozulu, Cole Hudson, DJ Campbell. Mm-hmm. DJ Campbell's in the best shape I've seen him in since he's been at Texas. You said the same thing. Jerry said the same thing. Sarkis said the same thing, that this is the best version of DJ Campbell they've gotten. Cole Hudson's really taken to the center position. I remember, CJ, in the spring when Arch was talking about Cole Hudson, they even got some work in at Hayden Connor's wedding, just working on getting snaps in. So, Arch is focused on Cole Hudson being his starting center. And like you said, Neto's been chomping at the bit. This is his opportunity now, if he can seize it, to show everybody, hey, maybe I should have been playing more the last few years, but regardless, I think he's going to be really good. So I actually, even though this line isn't going to be as highly thought of going into 2025 as it was in 2024, I actually think the ceiling might actually be higher with this group because it is inexperienced, but growing together with Arch, growing together with a running back room that's going to get CJ Baxter back full go at some point. I like where this offensive line can go. So with that in mind, CJ, let's look at recruiting. But before we do that, gotta thank our sponsor for this edition of On Texas Football. That is Allegiant Digital Marketing. Are you a business owner who struggles with any of the following? Finding new customers, getting consistent leads, finding marketing services to promote your business that actually work? Well, founder and CEO Chad Markham with Allegiant Digital Marketing. It's an Austin-based advertising agency. He's helped thousands of business owners just like you for over 25 years conquer these same challenges. So if you're ready to start making money in your business and grow with confidence, visit allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball and get a free marketing plan. Plus, you can save up to $2,500 in advertising with the Hook 'em Horn special today. Again, that's allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball. And we want to thank Allegiant Digital Marketing and Chad Markham for sponsoring this edition of On Texas Football. CJ, let's get into recruiting, and we're going to break this up into segments. For the folks listening and watching, this is all CJ. So, CJ, I'll let you take it from here. We got them kind of tiered off, grouped off. Let's look at the guys, the offensive line prospects in the 2026 cycle who've already visited campus.
Yeah, let's start there. Look, I know that Texas has the 2 commitments in the class, Max Wright and Nick Robertson. They're visiting June 20th, as well as a number of other commits in the class. But you talk about who's on campus currently and who's already visited campus. Well, that already visited campus group is just one, right? It's only Malachi Lee, the 6'7", 320-pound offensive tackle out of Hawaii. He's currently on an unofficial to Georgia. That's pretty significant right now, making the trip from Hawaii all the way over to Georgia, in which he was already in Athens for an official visit at the flip of the calendar from May to June, now making a return just 2 weeks later. Significant. He will be at Michigan June 20th. That's another team to watch. You'll hear Michigan's name in a lot of these recruitments moving forward. But the 3 guys on campus this weekend, we've talked about Sam Roseborough out of Florida. You look at Zayden Crimpton out of Prosper, Texas DFW. And, of course, Felix Ojo, the big-time offensive tackle out of Mansfield Lake Ridge. The 3 are on campus at the moment. I'm told that there are a number of big-time offensive linemen helping out in this recruitment already on campus. We're expecting Trevor Goosby to be the host of Felix Ojo. Nate Kibble is another one on campus right now. And Daniel Cruz actually has been training with Zayden Crimpton for a few years up in the DFW area. So Texas is going all hands on deck right now for this offensive line. But the big one, or one of the big ones, still remains, and that's John Turntine coming up June 20th. Of course, he is at Michigan now. And again, I mentioned Michigan. They're in it for Malachi Lee. They're in it for Zayden Crimpton, Ojo, and Turntine. At some point, they've got to find a way to protect Bryce Underwood. Their mega $1 million deal, right? They got to protect their franchise quarterback. And I have to imagine there's a trickle down to the 26 class saying, we got to make sure that this guy is protected. Which one of these offensive linemen do they truly make a big splash for? Will it be any of the 4? But right now, I'm keeping a close eye on Michigan as a team that's kind of on the outskirts of all 4 of these recruitments.
When you mention Michigan in there, it bears repeating. Like Sharon Moore is an offensive line guy, right? He's an OU grad, so you could knock him for that. But he is an O-line guy and actually a really good one. I feel like with as much crossover there is between really the SEC schools recruiting these guys and Michigan, look, Texas can't take all of them. They all can't go to Georgia. I feel like one of them, who I don't know who it is at this point, one of them's going to end up at Michigan. But, CJ, that said, that tells you I think Texas is going to end up with a couple of legitimate blue-chip offensive tackles in this class.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question's always been, how many can they take? Well, they could take plenty, right? Right? Coming into this weekend, it feels like they're in the lead for about 6 guys, right? Malachi Lee kind of being the lone guy in which maybe you don't know specifically where he sits in his recruitment. Is it Georgia? Is it Michigan? You know that Texas is very much in that race. Alabama's another. But you look at the rest of this list, and Sam Roseborough moving his official visit up from the June 20th to June 13th kind of gives you that sense of, I don't want the boat to leave me while I'm at the dock or arriving at the dock, right? So in the sense, if you're not following, for me, Sam Roseborough saying, hey, Coach Flood, Coach Sarkisian, don't give my spot away because I want to be on that cruise ship, right? So that's kind of where I'm at. And Texas could go a number of ways. I mentioned they got 2. That's a great base. Nick Robertson's an interior guy. I think Max Wright has the frame to grow into a tackle, about 6'7", 280 right now. Big hands, lengthy arms. But I could see the argument that maybe there's a spot for him on the interior. You look at what else Texas is recruiting. Sam Roseborough, interior guy. Zayden Crimpin, in my eyes, an interior guy who has the highest ceiling of the bunch at center, perhaps as well. Turn time, flip a coin. You're going to have an all-conference guy regardless. And then Felix Ojo, Malachi Lee, both are tackles. You end up with 4 of those 5, 4 of those 6, adding on to what you already have already with Nick Robertson, Max Wright. You're going to have a heck of a class. But ultimately, this weekend to me is I'm looking at Texas recruiting Felix Ojo like the franchise player that he said he's felt like he's been recruited as, and one of, if not both of these interior guys, and that's a great continuation of what had been a very solid start.
If there's a couple of things I'm thinking about, and they all kind of tie together. One is, if there's a silver lining from having Kelvin Banks drafted in the first round, Hayden Connor gets drafted, Cam Williams gets drafted, Jake Majors is going to have a chance to play in the NFL. There's a silver lining to losing 4 NFL guys, CJ. It's that Texas avoided one of those big runs of attrition. There wasn't that mass exodus at some point. I think because, guys, whether it's Andre Kojo or whether it's Neto Umazulo, whoever it was, guys see an opportunity to still compete for spots. The only guy that transferred out after spring practice was Malik Agbo. And I think we knew Malik was a little further down the depth chart than some other guys. As a matter of fact, Nick Brooks had effectively passed him on the depth chart. So Texas hasn't had just that mass exodus of young offensive line talent yet. But that's why I think the 2026 class is so important, CJ, because at some point and this is not anything to do with Kyle Flood or Sark or anything else. It is just law of averages and the way personnel works in college football. At some point, there will be offensive linemen on this roster who say, man, if I really want a chance to play and start and do it at a big time college football program, it's not going to be at Texas. I need to hit the portal and go somewhere else. It could be after the 2025 season is over. Regardless, 2026, it's a cycle where Texas really needs to reload. And like we just laid out, they're going to be able to reload with upwards of 6. If it's the right mix, maybe they do end up with 7 offensive linemen in this class.
Yeah, it sounds a little outrageous, but let me tell you, it's not. And the reason for that, Jeff, you mentioned 4 guys end up in the NFL last year. You're looking at a year where if all things go right, you could have 4 depart from this year's offensive line as well, right? DJ Campbell, Cole Hudson, Neto Umeozulu, all 3 are 4th-year seniors. Then you look at Trevor Goosby. Well, he's going to be technically a sophomore, but he's going to be a 3rd-year guy in the sense that he will be eligible for the NFL draft. We know how valuable tackles are. So there is a sense where you walk into 2026 and it's only Brandon Baker as a returning guy on your offensive line. That's not to panic Texas fans, because we've talked about Daniel Cruz being a guy that the staff likes. Nate Kibble is a guy the staff loves. Nick Brooks on the opposite side, you just mentioned it earlier, Jeff, very high from the staff already. But point being, there's plenty of room very early for a lot of these guys to climb the ranks in that too deep. And then you look at it full picture. That'd be 8 guys into the NFL draft or off to the NFL in 2 years from the offensive line alone. You've got to take a big group on the offensive line this year just to keep those numbers where you want them to be.
Yeah, I think Trevor Goosby is an interesting case for an early departure. Neto does have 1 year left as a 4th-year junior, as a redshirt junior on the roster. But CJ, it was talked about last offseason, and I remember talking about it. Look, it's quite possible. And then part of that because you were hearing some scuttlebutt. Hey, Cam Williams could be a one-and-done starter if things fell right. Now, I know he hoped to be drafted a lot higher than he was, and I think the knee had a lot to do with that during the pre-draft process. But regardless, yeah, I think whether you're a Texas fan watching or listening to this or you're us reporting on it, I think everybody needs to get their head right that Trevor, Goosby, and Neto, there's a chance they could both be one-and-done starters.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And look, for Trevor specifically, 6'7", now up to about 315, still has that basketball athleticism as well. He's going to surprise some folks this year. I've had him as one of those national guys where you look at Texas and the big names come to mind. Who's going to be somebody that stands up by the end of the year? It's been Trevor Goosby. I'm with you. Look, Nato deserves some credit for the way that he stuck it out at Texas, because there's been plenty of schools calling his phone, calling whoever's in his circle's phone each offseason saying, we got a spot for you if you want it. But credit to him for sticking it out, and fingers crossed that it pays off for him.
Yep. And with, DJ Campbell, Cole Hudson, Neto, Connor Robertson, now you're getting towards the end of that group of guys from that 2022 recruiting class. Kelvin Banks and Cam Williams, obviously with the headliners. Now you're getting to the point where the rest of those guys, now it's their time to sit at the head of the table and shine and show what they can do. So I'm looking forward to 2025, CJ. Like I said, with a young quarterback like Arch Manning, an inexperienced quarterback like Arch Manning, I think this offense can grow together. Even the inexperience of wide receiver, to an extent, this group can grow together. And I'll say this, I am willing to bet teams in the country will say, hey, I would much rather play Texas game 1 than play them game 12 and beyond, because by that point, who knows where this offense could be. All right, yeah. CJ, thank you for the knowledge and expertise as always. Again, thank you to Chad Markham and Allegiant Digital Marketing for sponsoring this edition of On Texas Football. Don't forget, get over to ontexasfootball.com. Whether it's a visit weekend, whether it's a random weekday, CJ, Jerry, Bobby, everybody keeping you up to date to the second on what's going on with recruiting on the 40 acres. We've got the team summer tidbits as well. If you're not a member at ontexasfootball.com, get over there right now. Use the promo code OTFOG. That'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95. Again, the promo code is OTFOG for 1 year of access at ontexasfootball.com for $39.95. You don't want to miss a minute of it. For CJ, for Matthew behind the scenes, for the entire On Texas Football staff, and for Chad Markham and Allegiant Digital Marketing, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, hook 'em.